On the morning Mara Ellery lost her room, she still had a job. She had wages in her pocket, winter work waiting 5 miles outside town, and a brass key to a store that no longer existed. What she did not have was a place she could sleep without becoming either the town's charity or the town's scandal. By sundown, she would ask a widower to marry her. The question was not why she asked. The question was why, after 4 quiet months of knowing her. Silas Ward answered before she finished the sentence. Juniper Crossing was a small settlement in eastern Oregon where the road narrowed between sagebrush hills and a cold river that flooded every spring. In the late 1880s, a person could arrive there with a trade, a good coat, and a respectable name, and still discover that none of those things guaranteed a bed. Mara had arrived in October with 1 carpetbag, $9, and the brass key. The key had belonged to Ellery Stationers, the little shop she had kept with her husband in a railroad town farther north. He had handled customers and purchasing. Mara had kept the accounts, ordered stock, balanced invoices, and knew exactly how much money was lost when a supplier added a line twice and hoped no one would notice. Then fever took her husband in 6 days. The shop lasted another 7 weeks. After that came the creditors, the auction, the final rent, and the moment when Mara locked the front door for the last time, even though the door no longer belonged to her. She kept the key because nobody had thought to ask for it. In Juniper Crossing, Mrs. Vale at the boarding house agreed to give her 1 week to find steady work. Mara found it on the 2nd day, though not in the way she expected. She was standing at the counter of Pritchard's Mercantile while the owner argued with a rancher over an invoice for winter supplies. The rancher was tall, heavy through the shoulders, and looked as though he trusted fences more than conversations. His name was Silas Ward. He ran cattle and cut hay on a spread west of town, where a narrow irrigation ditch made green land out of country that otherwise preferred dust. Pritchard tapped the invoice. "That's the total." Silas looked at it again. "It was lower when I ordered. Freight changed." Mara had not intended to speak. She was still learning which people in town could afford to be corrected. But the numbers were wrong. Freight didn't do that, she said. Both men looked at her. Mara stepped closer and pointed to 2 lines near the bottom. "You charged the harness leather once under tack and again under general goods, and those 4 sacks of salt are carried into the total twice." Pritchard frowned, ran a finger down the column, then muttered something about his clerk. The bill dropped by almost $6. Silas looked at Mara instead of the new total. "You keep books?" "I kept a business alive until there was no business left to keep." He considered that. "Mine's still alive, but the books might kill it before winter does." That was how Mara got her job. Not as a cook. Not as a housekeeper. Silas already cooked badly enough for himself and did not appear interested in improving. He hired her to straighten the ranch accounts, track feed, record deliveries, and tell him where money was disappearing. The work paid enough for her room at Mrs. Vale's with a little left over. Every morning before light, a ranch hand named Otis brought a wagon into town for mail and supplies. Mara rode back with him. Every evening, if the road was passable, she returned. At first, Silas treated her like a visiting clerk. He cleared one end of the kitchen table, brought in 3 years of ledgers, and placed them in front of her as if unloading fence posts. "This is all of it." Mara opened the first book. "No, this is what you wrote down. We'll find out whether it's all of it." For the first time, she saw a smile threaten the corner of his mouth. It disappeared before becoming public. The Ward Ranch was not failing, but it had small leaks everywhere. Feed was being bought in expensive little lots because nobody counted what remained in the shed. 2 customers were late paying for hay. A freight company had quietly raised a recurring charge. One hired man was drawing supplies on credit and forgetting to report them. Nothing dramatic. That was the danger. A ranch could survive 1 bad decision if everyone saw it. It could be bled by 50 small ones nobody bothered to add together. Mara added them together. Within 3 weeks, Silas stopped buying feed he already owned, collected 1 overdue account, and knew almost to the day how long the haystacks would carry the cattle if winter came hard. The work changed Mara too. At Ellery Stationers, her husband had introduced her as the woman who helped with the books. Silas never said that. When a supplier asked who had authority to question an invoice, Silas pointed toward Mara without looking up from the harness he was repairing. "She does," 2 words. Mara remembered them longer than he did. Silas Ward was 41 and had been alone for 3 years. His wife, Ruth, had died after a lung illness that worsened through one wet spring. There had been no dramatic story attached to it. She became sick. She failed to recover. The house grew quieter. Silas did not tell Mara this all at once. He mentioned Ruth when Mara found a bundle of old receipts in a flour tin and asked whose handwriting was on them. Later he said Ruth had planted the 2 apple trees south of the house. Another week passed before he admitted he had not sat beneath them since she died. Mara did not offer consolation. She knew too well how useless most consolation sounded to a person who had already survived the fact. She simply put the receipts in order and kept working. That was one of the things Silas came to trust about her. She did not demand that grief perform for her. November tightened the valley. The ditch glazed with ice at night. Cattle gathered in the lee of the sheds. The road to town became a strip of frozen ruts that could be harmless at noon and treacherous by dark. Mara still made the trip because her room was in town, and because she had built her life around one stubborn rule. If a thing could be paid for honestly, she would pay for it. Then the first real storm arrived. Snow came sideways before noon and erased the road by 3. Otis refused to hitch the wagon. "You'd get halfway to town," he told Mara, "and spend the night arguing with a drift." Silas opened the small storeroom off the kitchen, moved 2 crates, and carried in a spare mattress. "Door has a latch on your side," he said. "You can leave when the road opens." Mara looked at him. He had already turned away. She stayed 3 nights. Nothing happened. That should have been the end of it. But small towns can manufacture events from the absence of events. By the time Mara returned to Juniper Crossing, Mrs. Vale had heard that she had slept under Silas Ward's roof through the storm. Mrs. Vale was not cruel. That made the conversation worse. She kept her voice low. "My married daughter is coming home before Christmas. I need this room anyway, and people have started talking. I can't have trouble in the house." Mara stood beside the bed she had paid for every week. "When do you need me out?" "Saturday." It was Wednesday. Mara went to the other boarding house, full. The rooms above the Mercantile had been taken by 2 surveyors and a traveling dentist. The widow near the church rented only to families. A bed was open at a laundry house in Silver Bend, 12 miles south, but the bed came with long days at the wash tables. Taking it meant giving up the ranch books. Mara had escaped dependence by finding work, and now losing a room threatened to make her trade one hard-won livelihood for another simply to keep a roof. That Friday morning she went to the Ward Ranch with her carpetbag in the wagon. Silas saw it before he saw her face. He did not ask a careless question. He waited until they were inside. "Vale put you out?" "She needs the room." The talking helped her decide quickly. Silas's jaw tightened. "You can stay here." "No, the storeroom has a lock. That isn't the problem." He knew it was true. The storm had proven he could give her a locked door. The town had proven that a locked door was not the same as a protected name. Silas looked toward the window. "I can speak to Mrs. Vale." "And tell her what? That nothing happened?" "She already believes that." "Then I'll speak to Pritchard. He owns the rooms upstairs. They're full. I can pay someone to take another room." "No," that word landed harder than the others. Mara set her carpetbag beside the table. "I will not become another expense you carry because people prefer suspicion to arithmetic." Silas was silent. Mara took off her gloves, laid them beside the ledger, and looked directly at him. "There is one arrangement people will understand." His eyes lifted to hers. She could see that he understood before she said it. "Marry me." Silas did not move. Mara continued before courage could turn into embarrassment. "I am not asking you for rescue. I am asking for terms. I keep my wages. I keep working. I take the East Room. You owe me no affection, and I will not pretend affection I don't feel. If spring comes and one of us wants a different life, we say so plainly." Silas stared at the gloves on the table. "You thought this through. I had 3 days." His mouth almost smiled. Then his expression settled again. "All right." Mara blinked. "All right what?" "I'll marry you. You should think longer than that." "I have. I just asked. You've been asking me who I am for 4 months. Every time you trusted me with your pay, your name, your ride home, your work. I think I've had time." Mara had prepared arguments. She had not prepared for that. They were married the next afternoon by a justice of the peace in the back room of the Mercantile, where Pritchard kept a desk large enough for the register. Pritchard and Otis signed as witnesses. Silas and Mara rode back to the ranch in a light snow. There was no wedding supper. There was stew left from the day before, Silas carried Mara's carpet bag into the east room and set it beside the bed. Then he handed her a key. "Front door," he said. Mara looked at the plain iron key in her palm. "It wasn't locked before. It will be now if you want it to be." She put the key in her pocket, beside the brass one that opened nothing. Marriage did not transform the ranch overnight. Silas still rose before dawn. Mara still corrected his figures. He still forgot to wipe his boots when he came in from the barn, and she still refused to become responsible for a habit he had managed to maintain for 41 years. They kept separate rooms. They kept working. But something in the house changed because neither of them had to leave at evening. Conversation no longer ended when the wagon returned to town. Mara learned that Silas read old newspapers from back to front. Silas learned that Mara could not sleep if a column of numbers remained unfinished. He began leaving coffee near her ledger before going to the barn. She began mending his work gloves when the split leather made him curse over the reins. Neither called these things affection. Winter gave them more serious matters to name. In January, a week of hard cold crusted the upper pasture and forced the cattle lower. The herd began consuming hay faster than Mara's November estimate. Silas looked at the stacks and said they would manage. Mara looked at the ledger and said they would not. Not through March at this rate. Weather breaks. Maybe. Numbers don't improve because we're tired of looking at them. Silas bristled. It was their first real argument. He had raised cattle for 20 years. She had been on the ranch 4 months. He walked out before saying something worse. Mara sat alone at the table with the figures. For the first time since the wedding, the arrangement felt like what they had called it. 2 people sharing a roof because circumstances had cornered them. Then an hour later, Silas came back. He took off his hat and put it on the table. "Show me." Mara did. She showed him the daily draw, the remaining stacks, the extra consumption after the freeze, the margin they would need if March stayed cold. Silas listened. Then he changed the plan. They sold 6 cattle early, before the animals lost condition. They traded part of the payment for baled hay and feed grain hauled from a ranch closer to the rail line. Silas moved the weakest stock into the sheltered field near the cottonwoods. Mara cut every non-essential ranch purchase until spring. It cost them. The early sale brought less money than Silas wanted. The hauled feed was expensive. 2 days of moving cattle in wind left everyone exhausted. But when February came with another cold week, the hay held. That mattered more than being right. One evening after the last feed wagon was unloaded, Silas placed a folded paper beside Mara's ledger. It was the receipt from the early cattle sale. At the bottom, under the amount, he had written 2 words, "Mara's call." She looked at him. "What is this?" "A record. You like records. You hated the decision. I hated needing it. Different thing." He went to wash for supper. Mara kept the receipt. By March, the worst of winter loosened its grip. Water began ticking from the eaves in the afternoon. The road appeared again in long brown strips. Juniper Crossing stopped discussing the Ward marriage because a mining claim east of town produced a better subject. Mara could have moved back then. There were rooms available. She had saved enough money. The practical emergency was over. She said nothing about leaving. Neither did Silas. In April, the irrigation ditch broke at a weak bank above the lower field. For 6 hours they worked with Otis to stop the cut from widening. Silas drove stakes. Mara packed canvas and mud against the leak and ran back to the head gate twice to reduce the flow. They saved most of the bank, not all of it. A strip of field drowned before sundown. Mara stood ankle-deep in mud, breathing hard, looking at the water spreading over ground they had hoped to plant. "I should have seen that weak place in the fall," Silas said, "and I should have learned to fly." He looked at her. Mara pushed wet hair away from her face. "Some losses are just losses. We fix what they leave us." Silas laughed once, exhausted and surprised. It was the first time Mara had heard him laugh without trying to hide it. That evening they ate cold biscuits on the back step because neither had the strength to cook. The apple trees Ruth had planted were beginning to bud. Mara noticed Silas looking at them. "You haven't sat here in a long time," she said. "No, because of her?" He nodded. Mara waited. Silas rubbed mud from his knuckles. "I thought staying away was a way of keeping something." "Was it?" "No." The answer was quiet. Then he looked at her. "When spring came, I thought you'd go." Mara felt the iron front door key in her pocket. She had carried it every day since the wedding. "I thought I might. Do you want to?" She could have answered quickly. Instead, she gave him the same care she gave a column before writing the total. No. Silas let out a breath. Mara continued. I asked you to marry me because I needed a roof I could enter without asking permission from half the town. But that isn't why I stayed. He waited. I stayed because when I told you the ranch would run short of hay, you came back and said, show me. You didn't need me to be pleasant. You didn't need me to be grateful. You needed me to be right when the cattle depended on it. Silas looked toward the apple trees. I said yes because I knew what you were risking by asking. Mara turned to him. That sounds dangerously close to kindness. Don't spread it around. She laughed. Then after a moment she put her hand on the step between them. Silas looked at it. He did not take it immediately. That hesitation mattered to Mara more than speed would have. When his hand finally closed over hers, it was because she had left it there for him to choose. Later that night, Mara emptied her coat pockets before hanging it by the door. 2 keys fell into her palm. One was brass, polished smooth by years of opening a shop that was gone. The other was iron, dark and ordinary, cut for the front door of the house where her work was trusted and her name no longer needed defending. Mara opened the desk drawer, laid the brass key inside, and closed it. The iron key stayed in her pocket.